Hello everyone, and welcome to our Circle and Salve Women. For today we are going to discuss my reflection on one of my favorite books I've read, which is We Do Things Differently by Mark Stevenson, pardon me. And so he's this futurologist, really focusing on many inspirational stories where people have done breakthroughs throughout the world. And if you are looking for a book that is quite the inspirational testimonies of several types of what you perhaps would have seen as drawbacks, as defeated moments where people would have been resistant to continue because there would have been just no way to have actually gotten through any of the stumbling blocks that normally people would have run into. These are stories of people that said, no way, I'm going to give myself no excuse. I'm going to go ahead and make things happen in the way that may be not possible, but I will find a way to prove that indeed it can be. And so there are several stories in there that I really want to reflect on, just be able to relate to. And the two stories that I'll share with you have to do with me just in connection when the first time I ever learned how to swim, and also the time that I taught myself how to ride a bike. And you may think to yourself, well, how does that become anything that is inspirational or testimonial to going above and beyond the possibilities? And so if you read in my article, you can actually see how I was able to connect it, and hopefully in me trying to convey it here, you're able to understand how I may be able to connect it really in the midst of the mindset of you have to undergo survival tactics, or just the idea that I must enable for me to survive. This is what I have to do. And then eventually, if and when it does work, giving yourself no reason, no other means but to survive, then you will say to yourself, then I will thrive thereafter. And to me, that's what is the stronghold of the story, is, as I stated in the article, is if you ever want to know someone who is to succeed, ask someone who never gave themselves any other choice but to succeed. And I truly believe that Mark Stevenson had it there on the nose when it came to these testimonial stories of people who just had major breakthroughs where they were able to prove the impossible becoming possible. So for me, I want to be able to relate my story the very first time I learned how to swim. Now, I don't want you to sit here and think of this as anything dramatized. I'm, again, always trying to be in the light and not in darkness. I truly believe I am who I am today due to the fact of all the experiences and what I had to face in life, whether it be intentional or most of the time accidental. It made me the strong person I am, the strong-willed person that I am in mind, heart, body, and spirit. And so when I first learned how to swim, we'll get into riding the bike here shortly, but when I actually learned how to swim, I had a brother, or have a brother, who actually thought it was funny to throw me into a pool. Now, his thoughts were, dogs learn how to swim by just throwing them in the water, so why not throw my sister into the water and then she would learn how to swim? And my father hadn't seen right away that he had done this. He had taken us to this apartment complex pool that we had shortly resided in. And I just remember being at the bottom of that pool. And within a nanosecond, and just really thinking to myself, looking up and realizing that in able for me to get back up and get air once again, that I would need to climb up. And I stated this in the article that I had to climb up. I was paddling up because I didn't know how to swim. And so my mind told me just instinctively, just try to climb up to the top. And that's exactly what I did. And by the time I got to the top, I anticipated that my papa was going to try to jump into the water as soon as he was able to discover what my brother did, because I could hear him laughing, thinking it was funny. And I remember the rage and just a sudden rage and yet panic of my seeing that sight of my papa. And the first thing that I thought to myself is, when I came back up, I did not want him to jump in the water with all his clothes on. So I just hurried and gave him that look like, okay, I'm fine. And somehow I found myself just floating back with my ears into the water. Something instinctively told me to, and then kind of paddling my way. You know, when things like that happen, it's so instantaneous that you don't really know everything that you've done to get to the side. But once I found myself on the side, then I just held on. And so for me, that was one of my recollections of first knowing how to survive before you can thrive. Because then eventually I learned how to swim. And that was my very first lesson, though. A very odd way to learn how to swim. But because I broke through that mindset of I'll never learn how to swim, or I don't know how to swim, and I was forced into a position or a moment in my life where I had to learn. It was a literally sink or swim moment. I was able to then get to that survival mode and get myself to the top, and then find my way to the side where then I could hold on to the side of the pool. And I was very thankful that my papa didn't have to jump into the water. And it's just one of those moments where you say to yourself, wow, I actually learned how to swim, because you had to see the light of it and obviously not the darkness of it. I mean, I live to talk about it. And it's something that I look back to and thinking to myself that was one of those moments where I found my own inner strength to survive. And the other one that I shared was learning how to ride a bike. Now, the piece to this is the way that I actually found a way to teach myself how to ride the bike. I was just one of those that always felt like being child number 5 in my family, being the youngest. My siblings didn't have time to ever teach me anything. At that time, my oldest was already in the military. My second brother was living with us, going through his own rough times, as well as my other brother and my sister. We had gone to move to a different school every year. And so I did not want to feel or give the message that I was going to be a struggle or an extra amount of time and effort for anyone. And so I had received this hand-me-down bike, and obviously being very used, it didn't have any brakes at all. I came to discover that just as soon as I started to set my foot on it and realized there were no brakes. Just going down this slope that was right around the corner of the apartment complex we had lived in. And so I told myself, okay, how am I going to do this in teaching myself if it didn't have any brakes? I didn't want to mess up the shoes that I had, because it was the only shoes that I recall ever having. And so I had to take care of the shoes that I had. So in that manner, what I found and came to really think of was, if I hit this tree at the very end of this small slope, I could use it as my brakes. And that's exactly what I did. Every time I went this small slope, then I would just hit the tree and it would be my brakes. Every time it'd be my brakes. And I knew eventually that the next step to that, because that was the rudimentary part. No, that was not the piece that I'm connecting to with survival. It was more of, I knew that eventually I would have to turn the corner when I started to have the confidence to start to continue to ride. And so in the eventuality of me going, is that even a word? In that piece where it clicked inside, that I was like, okay, enough. You've already hit that tree many, many times. And this was just several days. I don't want you to think that, oh, I just taught myself the very first day and so forth. It was maybe just a couple of days where I finally said to myself, okay, I am not going to hit that tree any longer. I'm going to turn the corner. And once I turn the corner, then therefore I'm going to be able to control it even further and ride my bike. Did not have some kind of a backup plan or an after plan as to what then would I do if I continued to ride that bike around the corner. All I had was that mindset of, I am going to not run into that tree eventually, and then I'm going to go around the corner and then continue to ride my bike. And that's exactly what happened. Well, lo and behold, the very first time I decided to then go around the corner, I hear my belated brother, who has long passed us. And so he actually came out at the very same time, just coincidentally came out of the apartment complex and saw that I was going around the corner. And perhaps I would have dealt with it a little bit more differently if I had been alone, or maybe it just so happened that he was my support system, because as soon as he saw me, it gave me that moment of support where it's like, wow, someone is watching and I'm actually doing this. And so I get around the corner and start to ride my bike. I could hear him calling my papa to come out and watch me. My papa comes out, and it was just, again, it's so instantaneous because, you know, when you live in an apartment complex, it's not that very big. And so he comes out, both of them, and they're watching me. And it hit me at that given moment. This is that part where I then had to have an instinctive choice of, how do I survive this moment now that I'm riding my bike and I'm continuing forth, and yet I do not have any brakes. Now, I didn't have any helmet. If there were any at that time, definitely didn't know that they existed. And so for me, I then made the choice to say, okay, and it just came to me, if I just leaned to the side, then my body would fall, the bike would fall, and therefore the bike would stop. I did not want to hit any cars that had been parked around the apartment complex. Didn't want to hit the I still recall it being a brown fence on the left-hand side, because of course if I damaged that, then my papa would have to, you know, eventually have to pay for it. And I just did not, I mean, all these things, anyone has ever been in a position where so many things are streaming through your head, I had to be very just quick in thinking about what I was going to do next. And so I instinctively told myself, just lean your body to the side, the bike will crash, and therefore it'll stop. And that was my survival moment, because had I continued to go, I would have ran into perhaps cars backing up or cars that were coming in. And so I knew I had to stop it eventually. And that's exactly what I did, is I leaned my body to the side and I crashed. And right away, I told myself, oh my goodness, my brother and my dad are watching me from the back, and I did not want them to worry. So I just turned around and waved really quick, and I was like, I'm fine, you know, without saying I'm fine. I was pretty much probably still in shock that I was on the ground. And so I was right then at that moment, came to the realization I had taught myself to ride the bike. Didn't have brakes, but at that given moment, I survived my lesson of going around the corner and then eventually learning to continue to ride my bike, and then knowing that if I just leaned to the side, then I would end up stopping myself. Now, again, you could have said, why don't you just pause, put your feet down, so you could have stopped. Well, if you're ever one of those people who did not have shoes to replace, then you would understand why I was resistant to put my feet down, because I did not want my soles to get messed up. So that's my second story. And so in reflecting in this, my reflection and connection to those stories in this book is phenomenal stories of people who had to create, and you're going to have to read it yourself, really medical breakthrough. One, because a family member had some type of medical condition where then the brother was saying, okay, this is what I have to do to make sure that I end up finding a means to make sure that this information is then shared amongst the world. And so you find a way to do so. Life stops and you find the means to make it happen. It's that moment where you go, I am not going to allow myself to be excused from this. I'm going to make sure that I hold myself accountable for this moment where I have the capability, the ability, maybe to break through of the impossible and make this possible so that others can be aware, and that therefore I can help my sibling fight through or help this world to be well informed of this situation. And that's one of them. Another story was, which I thought, all of these just extremely inspiring, but where they weren't able to have any type of make food. And so they were able to cultivate rice in an area, and I want to say from the way it was described, it's more of like an uphill area where no one would think that rice could even be grown, and vast array of maybe lack of water and so forth. They found a way to then have rice where the soil was not made and ever thought of to actually grow or raise rice crops, and yet they did. So yet here there's another story, and then another piece where all of a sudden a community, a city has been totally abandoned because of the community, all of a sudden jobs changing and people having to leave since there were jobs lost. They ended up having to then go, okay, now that this place is abandoned, what do we do with all of these areas that have been left and just in complete what I'm thinking of, like a word where all of a sudden you're looking and it's no longer accommodated, and everyone is just essentially who's left behind thinking, okay, what now of this community? What is left of this community? And so the dereliction of that piece where everyone ends up leaving this community has caused homes to just be left empty, and then it just becomes this community where it's not made to be livable. And so they then create a place where now they start to grow vegetation that could help the community and make essentially like a greenhouse where then the community can not just survive but eventually thrive. And again, I always think that's a step process. And for you to even understand thriving, you have to undergo first the level of survival, because many of us are not handed down anything. When you're thriving, it means you're given everything that you possibly need so that you can say, okay, I've got this, now all I have to do is improve it and get better at it, and then therefore now I can see myself thriving, and then it would be something that would be multiplied 10 times. Well, when you're in the survival mode, pretty much you are the pathway maker, right? You are the person that has to create a breakthrough. And so these are the stories of that. And another one that I always thought was also yet a very inspiring story was, in a community where they had to create power that would save many, many people. It was a good financial backup for everyone in the community, where they would not have to depend on their government or however you may see it, where then they created their own power for their province or their community. And I think, yes, that was another yet very, very inspiring story. And another story in there was about education. And this is the one that I'm going to end with, where, because me being an educator, I really then started to really understand that no excuse policy, because when you read something that is not only inspirational, but it's very telling of where sometimes you fall into the mindset being surrounded by people saying it can never be done. Well, there was this one piece of this book where in a system where they were seen to have failed many, many times, someone comes in and decides, well, that's no longer going to be us. And for them to then, or for this person then to turn the school around, where not only does it become this place where it becomes an exemplar for others, but where it came from, to me, was the most inspiring part of it, because it was actually one of the worst, if not deemed to be the worst, school in the entire area. And yet here it was getting this recognition, and now all of a sudden being this forefront of an educational system where they created something that worked, and then it had transformed this school, this educational community, where all of a sudden kids were listening, they were learning, they were interactive. And for you to see something like that or to read about it, it truly gives you that no excuse policy of saying, if they can, then I can as well. And so hopefully you truly understand in books like these, again, We Do Things Differently by Mark Stevenson, ultimately it gives you that understanding where if you want to give an excuse, surely you can. And surely you can say, I am defeated because here are all the things that are against me. But in this book, it really shows that there are people who said, I'm not giving myself that option. I'm going to survive because I have no other means but to survive, and that's my only option. And how fascinating it is to read stories where then it empowers you to think the same. And so to me, when you read very empowering stories as those in this book, it really truly makes you change your mindset, and it puts you into the perspective of full strength, full light, and against all darkness and against all weakness, to say, yes, I can. And well, they are the first to tell you you're not the first, right? But maybe you are the first one for whatever it is that you may be thinking is not possible. Hopefully, if you get to read this book, you will have that ultimate feeling of saying, well, then I can too. In the words of my mother, God bless us all. Thank you for listening today. I hope to have another time with you. Until next time, keep doing you. Give yourself no excuse but to succeed. It can be done. It's not always going to happen instantaneously. Most of the time it won't. But you have to have faith. You have to have that mental strength in really understanding that your mind leads the body. And if you tell your body, if your mind tells your body that it can, it will follow. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next time.